Welcome, everybody. It's great to be with you. I want to say a few words of thanks, congratulations, and also I'm going to take a few moments to express or self-impose a challenge on all of us. First of all, welcome to the third annual Dreier Roundtable. Those are magical words to say, David. Congratulations to Zach Corser, Ken Miller, Eric Helland, and especially to our great champion, David Dreier. And many, many thanks to Secretary Kantor and all of our very special guests and experts here today. We really love having you. The morning session was extremely stimulating, but one of the things that I found inspiring about the speakers we had this morning is, in many ways, and especially in a world of an era of polarization, we have to fight back against the ostriches who have their heads in the sand on the one hand, and the Chicken Littles who are running around saying the sky is falling on the other. And it's just one of the centers that we need to grow back in the country. Now I'm talking about an even temperament as our center. We know we need to grow the middle class. We also need to grow the political center as another check and balance against the extremes that we're talking about here today. I want to thank also our extraordinary students, faculty and staff. For all of you to be here is a really great honor. Over the course of the last 3 years, I think the choice of themes, the choice by the leadership of the Dreier Roundtable have been disturbingly prescient. Immigration, with an extraordinary roundtable here and then at the Brookings. Polarization last year, capped by a workshop at Montpelier, at Madison's home, and the presentation of papers that will be published into what I believe will be an outstanding book by our faculty and some other top researchers in the field. An attempt to look at whether Madisonian principles provide an antidote to today's polarizing politics. And of course, this morning and also at lunch, our focus on populism and the anti-trade and other sort of drivers of populism about, I think, there's even greater polarization this year, largely because, as David pointed out, our political candidates have not really wanted to talk about the forces of globalization and technological transformation and the disruption from those large social, economic, cultural forces that is, in many ways, at the root of the anger around the country. Regardless of our political point of view about the election, I think we should all be deeply worried about this election, and not just the outcome, but what has already happened. What the candidates and the dynamics of the election reflect about all of us, each of us. And I mean that on a personal basis, not just the political one. Against the anger and the ad hominem attacks and the childish hypocrisies, I think this all imposes a special obligation on each of us. A steep challenge for us as a college, a steep challenge for us as a community, a steep challenge for us as a country, arguably as a civilization, given the broad dynamics that sweep across national borders that we're talking about here today. And this requires, I think, for us as a college to recommit every day, every moment, to the treasure of our commons of free expression, respectful debate, generous listening, and resolving dialogue. So what's the work to be done today and on November 9th? And this is where I want to leave you with 4 important commitments that I believe we can each, in our own way, internalize to make a difference. I think these are the commitments of the Dreier Roundtable, the commitments of Claremont McKenna College, and I think they're the commitments of our country at its best. First, let's imagine a voter that makes us angry or frustrated, or let's imagine a voter who's angry or frustrated with us. Is it possible to see the world from their point of view, to inquire in neutral terms about the source of their anger and frustration, to acknowledge that at an emotional level to ask ourselves what set of policies or mitigations would be responsive to that anger or frustration. If we're ever to pull the country back together, we're going to have to step across that uncomfortable threshold. There's just too much heel-digging polarization in the country right now. Second, let's draw on the normative resources we treasure in the United States, those we've used to resolve our own contradictions in our best moments in history, our warm humanity, our openness to dissent and to difference, our freedom-centered principles. And here, what's important is we can't be for the principles only when we ourselves benefit from them. It may be an integral aspect of a principle that it's only as good as those instances in which we experience a cost from supporting them. And that's the deal. We have to aim these principles critically at ourselves so that we're open to the free speech we don't like, so that we're ready to respect the freedoms that may come at some cost to ourselves. And so let's challenge our own contradictions and hypocrisies along the way. Third, I think we have to be willing to dream again, to engage in vision, to engage in strategy, as Secretary Kantor says, to lead, to step up, to take it on, regardless of the political costs. If we continue to internalize the political costs, we'll never be able to quite meet that challenge. What kind of society do we want to rebuild in the face of these powerful and economic forces that seem to be beyond our full control? And finally, and this is where the roundtable is such an exemplar, we have to keep the debate, we have to keep the conversation, we have to keep our respect for one another fully joined, fully engaged around the table, where there is no physical aisle, where it's not just about an us-them or some sort of polar identification of creating our own self-congratulations just because we are opposed to something else. We have to create that round table as our ethos of getting our equally bright and committed students, faculty, staff, leaders, community members around that table if we're ever going to solve or resolve or address the insurmountable problems that face us. So before asking our great Ken Miller, who's co-director of the Dreier Roundtable here, I just want to thank you all today for joining in these commitments, as these commitments may be the only antidote to our deepest concerns, our only source of hope that we have in our outstanding students, and as an inspiration of trust in ourselves to shape our own vision for the future. So thank you very much. Thank you, David, and thank you, Mickey.
Thank you, President Chodosh, and I also want to extend my welcome to all of you here today. It's my honor to introduce our two lunchtime discussants, former Chairman of the House Rules Committee, David Dreier, and former Secretary of Commerce, Mickey Kantor. Just a word about the Dreier Roundtable. As President Chodosh indicated, this is our third annual conference. We're still a young organization. We were founded at CMC for a number of purposes, but probably the core purpose was to bring together people from different political parties and perspectives to address pressing issues of the day. And what today's conference and this conversation at lunch, what they do is they exemplify that mission. We're bringing together people from different countries today, from different political parties and different backgrounds to talk about the issue of populism in our politics, both here in the United States and abroad. So I'll now introduce our speakers. First, a friend to many of us here in the audience, David Dreier was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and moved to Southern California to attend this college. He graduated in 1975 and then stayed in Claremont. He earned his master's degree at CGU and soon began to pursue a career in politics by running for Congress here in our local congressional district. In his first try, he won the Republican nomination, but lost to a Democratic incumbent in the general election. In his second try, he defeated the incumbent and began what became a 32-year career in Congress. Fairly early on in that career, he was kind enough to hire me to be one of his interns in Washington, D.C., as I was a member of the CMC Washington program. Well, you know, he still regrets it, but here we are today. So, among other achievements in Congress, he's served for many years as the ranking member and chairman of the powerful House Rules Committee. And he was known in Congress as both an advocate of conservative principles and, at the same time, somebody who could work with people in Congress and in Democratic administrations who had different perspectives, but he was interested in working together, in working across the aisle in order to try to find solutions that would benefit the country. It's also my pleasure to introduce the Honorable Mickey Kantor. Mr. Kantor was born in Nashville, Tennessee, and he went on to earn his bachelor's degree from Vanderbilt. He served as a naval officer before earning his law degree from Georgetown. As his career developed, Mr. Kantor both worked as an attorney and became actively involved in politics and public service. In 1992, he served as the national chair of the Clinton-Gore presidential campaign. He went on to serve in the Clinton administration as the United States Trade Representative from 1993 to 1996, and then as Secretary of Commerce from 1996 to 1997. In these roles, he was President Clinton's chief advisor on international trade policy, and he was highly successful in promoting trade through his work on NAFTA, its side agreements, and implementing legislation, and also in his role as chief negotiator to the 117-nation Uruguay round that created the world's largest trade pact, as well as other initiatives. And like Congressman Dreier, he was known as somebody who could work across political divides with Republicans as well. Today, Secretary Kantor is a partner with the law firm of Meyer Brown LLP, based in the firm's Washington, D.C. office. Please join me in welcoming Chairman Dreier and Secretary Kantor.
Thank you very much, Ken. Is this thing on? Here we go. So thank you very much, Ken, and thank you, Mr. President, for welcoming us. And right over your shoulder is one of your predecessors, Jack Stark, and I'm so happy to be here with the Starks as well, and so many other people. There are a number of new faces since we've had our two panels this morning, so I thought I'd take just a moment before Mickey and I have a discussion in which we're going to clearly talk about trade and areas of agreement, but obviously with the election, whatever it is, 12 days away, we are going to get right down into the ugly and mud of politics, and we want you all to join us in that effort. First of all, get right down in the gutter with Mickey and me is what we want you to do. So I have to say that Claremont McKenna College is a very, very special place. I had some options to go to school in the East when I was a young guy coming out of boarding school, and my father prevailed on me to come to his alma mater. And he did that, and I ended up becoming what I recently discovered by virtue of the spelling of my name, the first son of a CMC graduate to graduate from CMC. Marvin Drew's son, Ken, was a classmate of mine, but somebody said to me his name was spelled D-R-E-W, mine's D-R-E-I-E-R, so I got my diploma before he did, even though we were classmates. And so I'm particularly proud of that. And I was always honored to represent Claremont and the colleges here. I started out sort of winning Claremont, and my last elections I I didn't win it. And so when it came to redistricting, they often said, oh, well, you want to draw Claremont out of there because it's heavily Democratic and you're not winning votes there. And I said, no, 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 where Claremont is, I will run and stand. And so I was always pleased and proud to have this as the base from which I ran, because Ken didn't mention this, but when I won the nomination the first time, I lived what is now a science lab or some sort of thing in Phillips Hall when I won the nomination. And the next day I went out and actually bought a place because I figured I didn't fit in any kind of demographic mold here, so I could at least become a property owner. So I did that. And it was really my experience here that led me to pursue public service. My father, like lots of CMCers, was a businessman who had a real estate development, property management. He was in the media business back in the Midwest where I grew up. And he wanted me to follow in his footsteps doing that. And that was my plan. I began as an economics major. And then what happened was I did an internship for a member of the United States Congress. And I started beginning with Gov 20, reading James Madison, and I just became fascinated and immersed with public policy, and I made a determination that I wanted to do everything that I could to save the world. And so that led me to talk about public policy questions that were before us. And the founder of this institution, George C.S. Benson, a few other professors, some of my classmates, Mark Schwartz was around then, they were talking to me and encouraging me to consider running for the United States Congress, because I said of the congressman who was here, he had a tendency to say one thing when he was here in California and vote differently in Washington. The reason was this was the original congressional district that had sent Richard Nixon to Congress in 1946, 70 years ago, this next month. And the guy who won it by 735 votes out of 250,000 votes cast. In 1974, he was what's called a Watergate baby, came in the wake of Richard Nixon's resignation. And so when these people encouraged me, I sort of thought long and hard about it, because my father wanted me to go into our family's business. I was working here at CMC for Jack Stark. And then I just decided, what the heck? And so I was 25 then, and had just gotten my master's degree here. And I said, you know what, we should go through with this. And we were able, against 5 people, to win this election in 1978, in June of 1978. And then I went on, as Ken said, to narrowly lose the general election in 1978, and then was able to come in with a sweep of Ronald Reagan. And to sort of get into our topic, I mean, I learned from Madison that it's very important for there to be a clash of ideas. And that's something that Madison envisaged, believed to be very important. But Madison also understood that at the end of the day, after that clash of ideas continues to pursue, there needs to be a resolution. There needs to be a resolution. So I'm very proud to be a partisan Republican. Mickey Kantor is very proud to be a partisan Democrat. But both Mickey Kantor and David Dreier are Americans before we are partisans. And so at the end of the day, the American people still want us to get things done. And we in the previous 2 panels have been discussing the challenges on this issue of trade, which has been blurred so badly. But when I think back on the nearly third of a century that I was privileged to represent California in the Congress, I think back to accomplishments, and I'm proud to point to a lot of them. We have the issue focus here on issues that were priorities for me: institutional development, immigration studies, information flows, and international trade, which has been this year's topic. And as Hiram said, clearly very, very timely and important for us to do that. But I think that what we need to recognize is that we need to represent our parties, and we need to do everything that we possibly can to embody and represent our views as well. But at the end of the day, I do believe that most people want to see us get things done. And that's why, while I was proud of a number of partisan victories that I had, I was always more proud of being able to work in a bipartisan way. And that's why I'm going to just throw this out right now to Mickey and say, by the way, the reason I told the story about my history here is that I want many of the young people in this room to follow me serving in the United States Congress, in the California state legislature, or wherever you're from, state legislature. Get involved in public service. That's really the overriding mission. My secret mission of establishing this roundtable, which was initiated first by President Pamela Gann and then taken on, this was really the first initiative of President Chodosh when he became president, because I was leaving Congress just as he became president of CMC, and so we began talking about this, and I think it's an absolutely great opportunity, and I want to see you all through the internships and scholarships, fellowships, the things that Ken Miller and Eric Helen and Zach Corser are working on. I really want you all to take advantage of the Dreier Roundtable. So let me just throw out for Mickey at the very outset. It's kind of my view. So I consider myself, I just told the LA Times reporter here when I consider myself to be a pretty decisive person. I mean, I make a decision and I try to move ahead. And obviously, you have to occasionally shift, but I, for the most part, consider myself to be decisive. I have never in my entire life been more indecisive than I have been over the last several months as I look at the franchise that I have to cast a vote a week from next Tuesday. I've been indecisive because I have the ignominious distinction I'm the longest serving parliamentarian at Republican conventions. I was the parliamentarian for the last 4 Republican conventions by virtue of having been the chairman of the House Rules Committee. I grew up as a Republican, a Midwest Republican, and I want to support my party's nominee. But part of what I say is, just for the outset, I said, that clearly Donald Trump says and does everything that my mother and father told me to never say and never do. And actually, I used to say Donald Trump, says and does everything my mother and father taught me to never say and never do. But I realized that there are a few things that I do. I don't stand up and publicly do them, that like Donald Trump does. So I moved from taught to told in that explanation as to the way I am here. But so I've been so indecisive, and so as of today, my plan is to write in John Huntsman's name for President of the United States. I told Mickey this, and I know there are lots of people, that's a cop-out, and everybody has their analysis to what impact it has. I did like something Gary Johnson said when they talked about throwing their vote away, and he said, throwing your vote away is voting for somebody you don't believe in. And so I happen to believe in this guy, John Huntsman. He served as, he was at the time the youngest U.S. ambassador to Singapore under the first President Bush. He became Deputy U.S. Trade Representative, someone that Mickey and I know from that capacity. He became the governor of Utah, and most recently he was President Obama's ambassador to the People's Republic of China, and then he ran for president in 2012. In his presidential campaign, I was just telling Mickey this, he traveled to probably 50 campuses. He went to all the Ivy Leagues, and he traveled, he's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, and it was all over. And so the really important reason that I'm writing in John Huntsman's name is as follows. John Huntsman said to me, David, I visited 50 college campuses, and there was not a single campus that I went to that had students who were as smart and bright and capable and asked better questions than the students at Claremont McKenna College. And that's the real reason that I'm writing John Huntsman's name in to be President of the United States. So let me just give you my sort of my take on this. Looks like Hillary Clinton is most likely going to be President of the United States. I'm not a Hillary hater like lots of Republicans. In fact, I think it's kind of interestingly ironic that when Barack Obama was elected president, virtually every Republican, this, Republicans would say, oh my gosh, it's so horrible that Barack Obama is president of the United States. We would have been so much better off if Hillary Clinton if Hillary Clinton had been president of the United States. I mean, I can just go through the litany of Republicans who've said that, and now Hillary Clinton is the devil incarnate. And I think it's very interesting, and we all know the problems that Hillary has. Maureen Dowd, the columnist with the New York Times the other day, said, well, you know, as you look at this, it's interesting. Untrustworthy beats out unstable. And I thought that was a kind of an interesting analysis. So my take is as follows, and I want Mickey to respond to this, because we obviously have a very strong area of agreement. Mickey has been critical of Hillary and her campaign and buckling under basically to the Bernie forces. And so I look back on the years that I served there, and I say there was no more productive 5-year period of time than the last 5 years of the millennium, from 1995 to 2000. My party won the majority in 1994, and we were able to work very closely with Bill Clinton, and we were able to bring about major welfare reform. We brought about capital gains tax rate reduction. We did a number of things on reform. We laid the groundwork for China's accession to the World Trade Organization. We did impeach him in the process, I have to admit. But that aside, you know, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, did you enjoy the play? But you know, so there were clearly challenges. But there was so much productivity from 1995 to 2000, which was such an impressive time. Now, Mickey Kantor said something to me when we were talking, and I don't know if this is out of school, Mickey. I'm going to say something that you told me. Probably will be, but you know, I'll let him defend it. He can respond and call me a liar if he wants to, but he said to me, you know, David, he's very close to both the Clintons, known them for a long period of time. He said, you know, Hillary is really the conservative in that family. He said that you know, if you think about Bill Clinton, I mean, Hillary's instincts are such that, I mean, that the idea of working together in a bipartisan way is something that is very important. We talked about this notion of reaching out. I believe, and actually I told Hillary Clinton this a year ago. I said, you know, I truly believe that you have the potential to be a great president of the United States if you have strong Republican majorities in both houses of Congress. And there's so many people who say that they're casting the vote, oh yes, well I'm splitting my vote because I want Republicans to stand up and oppose Hillary Clinton. That's not what I want. What I want is I want there to be a level of productivity as an American citizen like that we saw in the last 5 years of the millennium. And so I would say to you, Mickey, I mean, you raise concern about Bernie Sanders. My take is that if we see the Senate and the House of Representatives slip into the hands of Democrats, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren will be forcing Hillary further to the left. And I think, and you were there during this period of time, you know, in the 1990s when Republican Congresses were able to work with Bill Clinton, I think that we have a chance of seeing some real greatness. So what's your take on that?
Wow, it's a fairly large question. First of all, let me thank Claremont, McKenna, and President Chodosh for having all of us here. I appreciate it very much. Hospitality is great, and I agree with you, David, on many things, but I think Vanderbilt probably comes first before Claremont and McKenna. But that's just, yeah, right. We do a little better in baseball than other things. I don't know about academics. I can't speak to that. No, thank you. Look, these are all very large and difficult questions, and it's not a matter of, in my view, this is my view, left and right. It's a matter of listening to the American people seriously, not just listening, hearing what they are saying, not just those who agree with you. I watch MSNBC because it makes me feel good, right? They agree with me. I cringe when I turn on Fox, but I know I have to. I have to hear the other side. But I do cringe, you know, it's difficult for me. I do too. But we've got to begin to hear what we're saying and begin to react in a way that's productive. I agree with what you say about it's not just getting along, it's understanding someone else's pressures, where they're coming from, President Chodosh, how they operate and how they don't operate, and being sensitive to it. That doesn't mean you have to agree. It does mean you have to move the ball forward. Jaime Serra is sitting right there. He was my partner in NAFTA, along with the Canadians, but Jaime was the key. No one listens more than Jaime. It is easier to work with. He represented his country fiercely, and I really appreciated that and admired that. I think I was fairly fierce in representing the United States.
No, you said you gave in to him on everything.
That's not what he says, but that's another question.
yeah.
But we got it done. Why? We knew we had to. The only option, as far as we were concerned, is to have an agreement that worked, that we could get through the Mexican Parliament, through the Congress of the United States, have approved and go into effect because we believed it would make a difference. And we believe it has. It's not perfect. There is no perfect agreement, not a trade agreement or any other agreement. What we need to do is constantly move the ball forward. There's much too much ego in Washington. David can tell you about that. And how people
left when I retired.
Yeah, right. Only 80%. There's 20% left. The people believe that their era, whatever it happens to be, must be the most important era ever, must be the most important thing that ever happened. No, it's not. Not for any of us. Try to move the ball forward just a bit. Try to make some progress. Try to address the issues. Try to do what you swore to do, is represent, in our case, Jaime, the American people. And do it. That's my phone. That's okay. They'll go away. That's probably Hillary calling. Why are you opposing me on trade? And that sounds simple, and it sounds a little bit naive, maybe even simplistic, but it's not. As I said, too many people believe that you have to resolve the problem forever and make it perfect. You're not going to do that. Anyone. So what do you have to do? In our country, there are two parties. The Congress is made up, and you cannot get anything done in the House, almost with everything, without 60% of the vote. You just can't get it done. So you've got to work, no matter what your majority is, you can't get it done, unless you have over 60%, which no one's had in a long, long time. You can't, no president can move something by herself or himself. And so what you have to do is try to find issues that you can agree on. You've got to find ways to compromise. You've got to have some priorities, and you've got to make sure that you express them clearly, directly, and honestly to the American public. And a lot of that's not happening today. And I'm criticizing my own party as well as the Republican Party, both sides. And what's happened is we've all become reality television oriented. You go on television and you have to make an impact. You have to say something. You know, Donald Trump is taking it to Mars in what he is doing. But the fact is, a lot of folks have engaged in that, and it's encouraged and promoted by the media. I'm not blaming the media. That's what they do. So somehow we have got to come to the realization that real leadership is not in just dominating the airwaves every night, not saying something that's controversial, but it's actually talking honestly to the American public and talking through the issues in a way that makes sense. And you rarely hear that these days from either side. Now, there are good people in both parties, good, decent, caring people who want to serve the public. And what we need to do is encourage them to step up and take the ball and run with it. And that's not being done. I wish it were done more. This campaign, I can't wait till it's over. I don't know if you feel the way I do, but I have never been, and this is my friend running. I always thought that she would make even a better president than her husband. She's incredibly bright, able, stable, considered, prepared, ready to go, but it's just been awful, both sides. Mostly, I've got to say, mostly Donald Trump. and he has debased American politics. He's made us all look bad as a country. He's frightened other nations, as Jaime and others will tell you. He's made us look like we are an unstable democracy. Well, on November 9th, we're going to have to come together. And I hope people in this room, people in California, and people around the country come together and begin to look at our problems in a way that's not partisan, not ideological, not with our feet not stuck in concrete. The famous Ronald Reagan, which you hear is the sound of concrete cracking around my feet when he signed a choice bill, right? Bob Moretti's bill, long ago. Ronald Reagan understood it. Bill Clinton understood it. Barack Obama understands it, and so does Hillary Clinton. But she's going to have to step up, but so are all of we, to help her do this. You know, you can run against 4 years, try to beat her. That's what you're supposed to do. Try to keep the Congress. Try to do what Republicans should do. But also, the Democrats have to step up and work with the Republicans until we get there and do things like immigration reform, which is, let me say one other thing, and I'm going too long and I apologize. It's stunning to me the Republican Party is not leading on immigration reform. Just stop and think about it. They are getting slaughtered politically in the Latino community, because starting with Pete Wilson in Prop 187 here in California, and then going through what's happened with opposing immigration reform in the Congress, they have written off the Latino community, the fastest growing minority group in America. And folks, very soon, America is going to be a majority minority country, just like California is a state.
So, Mickey,
today.
on that point.
And so let me just finish, just one sentence. And so therefore, it is, I'd like to hear from you. It is just inexplicable to me that the Republican Party would not be out front in immigration reform. I don't get it.
I totally agree. Okay, so let me explain sort of the partisan Republican reason that Republicans put forward. I don't embrace this one, but the view is that the reason Democrats are such proponents of comprehensive immigration reform is that they are going to register all of these new citizens as Democrats, and they won't become Republicans. My response is it's up to the Republican Party to appeal to those new immigrants. And so, I mean, you know that you know, for me, the only time I ever thought I had the potential to lose an election was when I was accused. I mean, I've joked with Jaime about this, and that is I was accused of being Mexico's representative in Washington, not California's, because I took this very perverse view.
You weren't?
Yeah, exactly. I took this very perverse view. I didn't want to machine gun down 6-year-old children at the border, you know, which was, there was something wrong with me for not wanting to do that. And so I believed that we had to address and bring about a resolution to this. So let me say that there are lots of Republicans. You know that this was Ronald Reagan's vision in 1986. You know, he was a big proponent of this and passed the last major immigration bill. And you know, we discussed that at our meeting 2 years ago at length, but I will say that you're right, that Republicans should be playing a stronger leadership role in bringing about major immigration comprehensive reform. So let me just say, I think there's still a little politician left in you. So I asked you the question, do you believe that having both houses of Congress in Republican hands can play a role in making your friend and mine, Hillary Clinton, a better president of the United States?
Oh, you could argue either side of that. I'm not avoiding the question. I'm not sure that's true.
You didn't answer it when I asked you first.
I'm going to answer it now. I'm going to be right. I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure that if she had a big congressional majority in both houses, that would be good. I'm not sure that's a good thing. I'm not so sure that having a strong Republican majority in each house would allow her to move things forward as well as she should. It's not impossible. I understand your thought. I understand the sentiment behind it. I understand. But what I'd love to see, hear what I'd love to see. I have not seen, I'm just going to be direct with you, and you know I never pull punches, the Republican majority in the House particularly wanting to cooperate with Democrats and with President Obama. They really haven't. And it's not Paul Ryan's fault. Yeah. I know he's got a constituency problem in the House on his right that he has a hard time dealing with. But that's what we're going to have to deal with. As Hillary's going to have to deal with issues that are difficult for her, like tax reform. She's going to have to do it. It's going to be a trade-off for immigration reform and other things, and a big infrastructure program. We need to do all three, but you can't do it alone, and you can't do it without compromising with the Republicans. But the Republicans have to step up as well.
So, Mickey, let me just tell you my slightly different take on it, and why I'm, I'm a Hillary fan. And by the way, interestingly enough, I was just thinking on the trade issue. When Hillary was Secretary of State, she encouraged me to introduce a U.S.-Egypt free trade agreement, which was the only thing that we could get the Salafis, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the secularists to agree to there. So I championed that at her encouragement. And so, I am a big fan and a supporter of potentially bringing this about. I put the blame for the Republicans not working with President Obama at the feet of the President of the United States. When Barack Obama was my colleague in the Congress, I worked with him on a number of issues. We worked on ethics and lobbying reform. I worked with him on the development of democratic institutions in Africa. In fact, there was kind of a joke. I was just talking to him, and I went and actually announced that he was going to be visiting Kenya, and I just told what he said there, and then the Chicago Tribune the next day said this weird thing. This California congressman announced Barack Obama's visit. He was a senator at that time. So my point is I worked closely with him when we were colleagues. When he became president, it was a completely different story, 180 degrees from the relationship that I had with Bill Clinton. And so I've got to say that, presidential leadership is what is necessary. When Mitch McConnell made that famous statement that his priority was to, make sure that Barack Obama served only one term right after he was elected and all, it was up to the President of the United States to step up to the plate. And for him to laugh about that and go to him, that's what Bill Clinton would have done. Bill Clinton would have done that in a minute in responding to that. He did that constantly with Gingrich in the sparring when Gingrich was after him. And so that's why I really do. And then I will tell you, what's in the news this week? The failure of Obamacare. I mean, and Bill Clinton used the word crazy to describe Obamacare. I went back and did a study looking at the two largest programs that were put into place preceding this. In 1935, Social Security. In 1965, Medicare. In 1935, we saw over 30% of the Republicans in both houses of Congress vote in support of the Social Security program. In 1965, there were more Republicans than Democrats by a 2-vote margin in the House of Representatives who voted in favor of Medicare. Why? Because President Roosevelt and President Johnson both reached out and worked with Democrats. So we as Republicans worked with Republicans. We as Republicans offered several really thoughtful proposals to deal with the issue of, we all want people to have access to affordable health care. I mean, nobody wants to deny it to anyone. We very much want to do that. We proposed something that had passed the House, was killed by Democrats in the Senate, called associated health plans, which were designed to bring small businesses together to pool to get lower insurance rates like large corporations. We believed in the notion of expanding medical savings accounts, HSAs. The president, in his State of the Union message, I was sitting there when he talked about meaningful lawsuit abuse reform. We've done that here in California. He talked about it. None of it was included in there. You look at the whole issue, and this is the only thing Trump says, the purchase of insurance across state lines, which is something that I know would be difficult to work through. So my point is this. I sat in the Rules Committee when I was ranking member, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and the 900-page health care bill was dropped into my lap as the Republican member, and we voted it within 3 minutes out of the Rules Committee. Bill Clinton would never have done that. And so this was the first time. So needless to say, there were really no Republicans who supported that health care measure. I argue that if any of these provisions that I mentioned had been in some way included, there could have been at least some kind of bipartisan support. When we did Medicare Part D, the prescription drug bill, I mean, it would have been a Democratic initiative. It basically said, what is it that we have right now? Medicare pays for open heart surgery but won't pay for Lipitor. And so we have this kind of thing going on. Democrats should have joined with Republicans, and we did have some bipartisan support. But for the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, one Republican did vote for it. There's a guy called Joseph Gow who won the congressional seat of William Jefferson, who was the guy who had $90,000 in cash in his freezer. You know, we describe that as a new definition of Jeffersonian democracy. But so this guy beat him and came in, and he thought the Republican thought Barack Obama was. So for all intents and purposes, no Republican supported the Affordable Care Act, and Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi could have made that happen. I believe that Hillary Clinton, when she's president, because I'm convinced that she will become president of the United States, that she will work very closely, and I want to do everything I can to encourage that to happen, to resolve a lot of these issues. And one of the first things, Mickey, that's going to have to be done is to clean up the premiums and co-pays on the Affordable Care Act when you see this massive increase in co-pays and premiums taking place.
Healthcare is a major issue, has to be dealt with. Clearly, let me just say, I go back to what I said about nothing's perfect. No bill is perfect, no negotiation's perfect, no trade agreement's perfect. People shouldn't get their egos again tied up in, oh my God, I negotiated that, or it was my bill, therefore it's not gonna be changed. Every nit and jot has to be the same. You've got to be able to go. We ought to go back to NAFTA, frankly, Jaime. It needs to be renegotiated. There are things that need to be done. There was no internet. There was no cloud. There was no anything when we did NAFTA. We had no idea how that would affect trade and how it would affect our lives and how it would affect trade agreements. TPP covers a lot of that we never even thought about in NAFTA because it didn't exist. We ought to go back to all our trade agreements, frankly, and they need to be updated. The next USTR, the next Secretary of Commerce, the next Secretary of the Treasury, the next administration, instead of going out and trying to do something grandiose, frankly, ought to go back to the trade agreements and go back to our trading partners and say, look, what do we need to do to protect data flows? If one thing, protect data flows, protect intellectual property, how are we going to do it in the future? How can we work together? No one wants to do it. You know why? Because it doesn't make the front page of the New York Times. Mm-hmm. Really, I hate to say it, but that's why they don't do it. I hope Hillary, as President of the United States, because she is so well organized and so stable, will do those kinds of things, not just in trade, but in other areas as well. So in healthcare, right, no one has been beaten up more about healthcare than Hillary Clinton.
Going back to the
She
90s,
tried to make it happen, in
1993,
lady, and she got beat. She got beat badly. And what she did is make it too detailed, 3,000 pages, no one understood it, and it went down to a crashing defeat. Your friend Danny Rostenkowski advised her not to do it that way, but she went ahead and did it. So I hope she goes back and sits down with Republicans, sits down with Paul Ryan and the chairs of the committees and say, folks, let's see what we can do to make this better. Let's see if we can react to the American people and do something that's wise and productive here.
That's why we need Republican majorities to do that, because if she sits down with Bernie Sanders, who potentially become chairman of the Senate Finance Committee,
I understand.
That would not bode well for the prospect of bringing about that kind of solution.
If we gain control of the Senate, the Democrats gain control of the Senate, and Chuck Schumer will be the Senate leader, there's got to be an agreement with Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer that he is going to ride herd on his chairs, even Bernie Sanders. It's going to be difficult, but he's going to have to. She's going to have to do that, and he's going to have to do that. I hope you're right. He doesn't have any choice if we're going to get something.
By the way,
now,
to your credit on the NAFTA, I remember talking to you just as NAFTA was we were completing that, and I remember your one regret was you wanted to figure out for faster implementation. You remember that you were looking at the 15-year period, and you talked about how one of your priorities was going to be to try and speed up the implementation. Isn't that right, Jaime? To try and move it faster and faster.
Well, in trade agreements, just one detail. I'm sorry I'm a trade wonk, and I love the subject. We need to have, like we've done at the WTO, to have judicial systems within the trade world to resolve trade disputes with sanctions so countries would adhere to their obligations, including the United States. We have now brought in the last 4 years 23 cases at the WTO and won 16, the U.S., the other 7 are pending. I say that only to say we need to have in trade, it's the only, by the way, international agreements that have this kind of system. There is no other thing with sanctions, where you go through a judicial system, you win or lose, and you have sanctions if you lose. That's what needs to be done to restore credibility with the American public that we're not being taken advantage of, that in fact the U.S. had been treated fairly. Let me say one other thing I wanted to say today, and just very quick. We got to quit using the term free trade. That is the worst. We do not want free trade. We want rules-based trade. And free trade, American people believe when you say free trade, you're giving it away. Remember what the history is. After the Second World War, we did give away our markets. We wanted to make Europe and Japan stronger. American people came to the conclusion that in trade, they got everything and we got nothing. And let me tell you, that's the way it was a long time ago before Ronald Reagan. Now it is fair and it's rules-based, and it's got to be more rules-based. And we've got to change our language surrounding trade.
Yep. No, I think that's a very, very fair point. We all know that Zach Corser really guides the Dreier Roundtable. He does all the work, and I've really wondered what it is that the co-directors, Professor Ken Miller and Professor Eric Helen do. We finally found a role for them to play with the Dreier Roundtable. They each are holding the microphones that will give you all the opportunities to ask questions and offer your comments to us.
And we'll pass the mic. We've each got half the room.
Congressman Dreier, since you are friends with Hillary, do you see yourself taking any role in her administration?
You know, it was an amazing honor for me to have my name on the ballot 34 times, counting the primary and general elections. James Madison said that you should serve and then go home and live with the laws that have been passed. And so I would very much like to be able to continue making money so that I can contribute it to Claremont McKenna College to help keep these interns and scholars and others going. And so I feel like a majority of my life was spent serving the Congress, and so I will do anything I can to help. I will say that. I mean, and Mickey knows that, and Jaime knows that. I'm going to be doing some things. I want to do what I can to strengthen the relationship between Mexico and the United States, which has faced some challenges recently because of the presidential campaign. So I want to do everything that I can to help. But I don't want to go back to Washington, D.C. I love the fact that I live back here in Los Angeles. I can't imagine living anyplace else. But I'll do anything I can as an American to help out.
Hi. So my question mostly pertains to technology and the way you think that's going to work, particularly influence international trade. How are you going to use all of the huge data that we now have that we didn't have when NAFTA was designed to sort of improve trade, make it more efficient, make it more accessible, so to speak?
Well, I mean, basically it's the point that so this is the point that you were raising earlier, and that is the imperative of updating the agreements that we have to deal with the technological advances that we've seen. I mean, as Mickey said, you know, there was no internet when the NAFTA was negotiated. I mean, we were just in the process of moving in that direction, and so I think that you know, if you want to outline your argument again, just about the imperative of updating.
Yeah, let me. I'll excuse me for being sort of simple about this, but I think it's not that simple. We're going to be globalized whether we like it or not. Some people don't like it, but that's the reality. It's not going to stop. The only question is, how are we going to administer it? How are we going to make the rules? What are the rules going to be? Therefore, two things. Someone has to write the rules, someone has to lead. Now, let me make it clear. If the U.S. doesn't lead and absents itself from trade negotiations, I don't think I have to tell you who is going to lead. It's already happening in Asia. And that doesn't mean, look, I think there's a duopoly in the world between the U.S. and China, and they need to come together, and we need to do more together. And I think this administration's not done a particularly good job with that. And I think we do need to do a better job. But what we need to do is say to China, we want you in TPP. assuming there's a TPP in existence. We want you in. We will join the Asian Infrastructure Bank, which you have set up. We want to show you we'll work together. And we have 6 or 7 other things on our agenda. East China Sea, South China Sea, North Korea, the islands, the offshore person-made islands by China. There are all kinds of issues that we have with them, including potential clashes in Africa. And we need to work with the Chinese, and that becomes a very high priority. But the way you instigate that is through trade. Trade has a national security implication that's very strong, because countries that tend to have large trading relationships tend not to fight. It's not in their interest. And they tend to be able to draw themselves together and understand each other.
I like to say that trade is the currency of peace.
Well, that's a good way of saying it. And so this has much larger implications than just, and by the way, since we have now thrown in, because of Jaime's willingness to consider it and work with us on labor and environment, now corruption, by the way, Jaime, in the TPP, we're now using trade agreements to make even more progress. And let me tell you, I want to say it, it has nothing to do with this, it's a longer seminar. Global warming is an existential threat, no matter what Donald Trump says. And we better do something about it. And one way to deal with it is force countries to enforce their environmental laws and regulations. And that's what you can do with trade agreements. That's what we've done at the WTO. That's what we've done in individual free trade agreements. Again, I hate that term, with trade agreements. And so therefore, that's just one example of something we can do. Bribery and corruption are a stain on the world economy. We've got to do something about that. And we're not doing enough about it. But for the first time ever in the TPP, there are admonitions on bribery and corruption. That's a big step forward. Mm-hmm. You never hear anybody talk about that, of course, but it's in there. Yep. And so we've got a lot to do, but your answer to your question is that it can be done. We need to bring Republicans and Democrats together. Let me just say one thing about NAFTA and David Dreier, who was chair of the Rules Committee. NAFTA got 234 votes in the House to win. 130 were Republican, 104 were Democrats. Today, you tell people that, and they're stunned that 104 Democrats voted for NAFTA. In the fast track
Sadly,
bill,
today they're stunned that 134 Republicans voted for NAFTA because
exactly.
Republicans.
And so what you've got now is we have had a regression, and we've got to have a president who's going to lead and take us out of that regression, and congressional leaders, by the way.
Just on one of the details, so one of the big disputes that we had was on the so-called blue and green issues, which are labor and environment issues going back into the 1990s. And I think it's important, Mickey has won out that those things are included. I always argue that trade-related items like intellectual property should be higher priorities than labor and the environment. The reason being that trade agreements enhance opportunities for economic growth, and labor and environmental standards are addressed. I mean, I've regularly told, I told Joanna and Jaime when we were walking last night that when I enrolled as a freshman here, it took me 6 weeks to actually see the Mount Baldy and the foothills that were behind here in the 1970s. We worked together, our country, because we had a strong, vibrant economy, was able to work business and government together to deal with things like improving environmental quality. I mean, I joke that I may be a Republican, but I still like to drink clean water and breathe clean air. And so but that came about because of economic growth. So we have to recognize that sure, it's fine having the labor and environmental provisions in the agreements, but economic growth is also a real driver of enhanced environmental quality and enhanced worker rights.
Thank you both for coming and speaking, and also thank you to the folks who spoke earlier. My question kind of ties into an op-ed that Jeff Sachs wrote in the Boston Globe about a week and a half ago. And he has one of the more nuanced criticisms that I've seen of TPP. And basically, he grants the premise that free trade is good and does expand the pie. He then kind of takes issue with how the pie then, once it's expanded, is divided up inside of the US and kind of the haves and have-nots. And earlier, you spoke about retraining opportunities, which have been a big part of free trade agreements in the past. He kind of talks a little bit about fiscal policy and using that to kind of redistribute, great word right there, to redistribute the pie a little bit. I guess one, is that a piece of policy that you think should be a part of trade agreements and trade negotiations? Two, has it been used in the past? And three, is there a mechanism, given the kind of disjointedness between voting on the trade agreement and voting on fiscal policies, is there a mechanism to actually tie those together, or does it automatically get separated?
Well, first, let me just say, I want to thank Chris, who is a Robert Day Scholar, graduated from this institution in 2009. He came all the way from New York City to be here at part of our program today to listen to Mickey and me babble on. So thanks loads for doing that, Chris. Yeah, we apologize for not making. So let me tell you, I mean, I've known Jeffrey Sachs for a long period of time. I spent time with him in Poland in 1989, going back then, as he played a huge role bring that about. And he's an economist who clearly is, left of center, no doubt about that. And I think that this notion of saying, you want to tie fiscal policy to TPP because we're not going to see these benefits. In Eric Helen's panel earlier, this is one of the things that we were talking about is we recognize that there is displacement. We recognize that there are challenges that come from this. And we need to have, again, retraining provisions. We need to do everything that we can to focus on efforts that the government can take to deal in the Rust Belt if globalization itself has created these problems. But I think that at the end of the day, I mean, you have to look at the big picture, and to use Eric's term again, I mean, we're the coastal elites on this, and we benefit and are not hurt by it. But empirical evidence does show that there is an overall benefit from this, and I just philosophically would have a difficult time in the government trying to make a determination and micromanaging exactly who is going to benefit in what area from it. And you saw his piece as well, Mickey, Jeff's piece. So,
Well, I thought he missed something, at least in my view, something very important. Forget about trade agreements. We need to have a real retraining, apprenticeship, technical program of education in this country, no matter what. Look, jobs are going to shift. If you never had any other trade agreement ever again, jobs will shift because we talked about it, technology and globalization, the movement of capital, the movement of people. It's happening more and more every day. So what you have to do is train people again and again for 4 or 5 jobs they'll hold in their lifetime, maybe more. I don't know, President Chodosh, how many it will be on the average. But the fact is, this is a new generation and a new world, and technology is going to change rapidly before our very eyes. Just look what's happening in the science and medical professions. So the idea is to put enough money in our budgets, state and federal, to retrain people with a real educational program. Our educational system is falling apart, if it ever existed in this area, and we must do something about it. Our public education system in and of itself is somewhat of a disaster. And the people who get hurt are the poorest, or people of color, people we want to serve. So I've got to say, my party's been hypocritical about this too. We have got to begin to shift our priorities, not because we're some bleeding heart liberals, which I am, of course, but let's...
I'm a bleeding heart conservative, is what I am.
But we want people to progress, to make it in life, to have opportunity. You can't do it in today's world without education. And anybody who thinks we can get along without doing that, starting at early childhood education, has been smoking marijuana before they should have. And so we've
Not
got...
till a week from Tuesday. Is
Yeah,
when
right,
that
that'll
happens.
win.
Right, yeah.
So folks, it's much more complicated and much more simple than it seems. And it's not just trade agreements are only rules. That's all they are. They're not any be-all and end-all of what happens economically. They're only part of riding along what's going on and hoping you can regulate it in a way that's fair and reasonable and levels the playing field. That's all it's about. It's not that damn complicated. Even Jaime and I understood it. And that is really something.
That is.
That's really. So I'm delighted I'm here. I'm delighted all of you. I'm sorry you had to listen to me. David, I want to say one thing about you. There wouldn't have been a NAFTA without you. We couldn't have got it done.
Or you.
The Rules Committee was so critical, and you were so critical, and President Clinton understood it, and I understood it. And you worked with us every step of the way. And you know, sometimes it's not easy. You had your own pressures. We had our own pressures. I mean, we had labor banging on our heads every day. You had your people in the House banging on your head, but you got it done. And you did the best thing for the country. And then we got the Uruguay round through the Congress. And then we got other trade agreements through because of your leadership, so thank you very much.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And I keep hearing that that's the greatest disaster in world history. You know, that's what I continue to hear. So let me.
It's the worst agreement in world history, no matter what agreement, the worst one ever.
Let me just say that Mickey is interestingly in his remarks here has led to a discussion of the transition to the next program that we are going to be working on. As I said, I focused on 4 I's as priorities for me in the Congress, and institutional development is one of them. And President Chodosh is in the process of leading a major national discussion on post-secondary education here in the United States. I argue that when we look at David Ricardo's comparative advantage, our post-secondary education system is clearly the world's best. I say there is no greater comparative advantage that the United States of America has in the world. And by virtue of that, I think it's going to be important for us to have a discussion. It is going to be part of our institutional development because the institution of post-secondary education is something that is a very, very, very high priority. And we as a nation have really not taken what is our greatest strength and looked where we're going in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And President Chodosh is going to be leading that effort, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to include that next year as part of the Dreier Roundtable, because as we look at this issue of trade, clearly having an educated electorate is at the very, very top of the list of something that needs to be done. I want to personally say again to every one of these undergraduates here, I want you to consider public service. I want you to be financially very successful, but I want you to consider part of your lives in public service. The mission of this institution, I'm very glad that Jaime raised the motto before about civilization is enhanced through commerce. He said trade through commerce. But the mission of the institution is to foster leadership in business, government, and the professions. That's something that makes Claremont McKenna College a very unique and special place. And so if I can do anything with having left the Congress and come back here, it's to encourage you all into public service. Thank you to everyone who made the effort to be here. Mickey left West Los Angeles, Santa Monica at 6 o'clock this morning. Jaime came in from Mexico. We have, Vincent came all the way from France. So I appreciate the effort that has been made by so many people. And I've got to tell you that it's a great thrill. So I'll end with the joke that I mentioned at dinner last night. So earlier this year, a few months ago, I was asked to give an address to the Trilateral Commission. And I went there, and I had not seen Jaime, and Herminio Blanco was there too, Mickey. I had not seen them in 15 or 20 years. And so Jaime came over, and we embraced, and he said, David, will you please go back to Washington and carry a message from us to Donald Trump? Please tell him that we are happy to pay for the construction of that wall. But tell him that it will be done only under the 1848 borders. And so I want to say that even through these challenging, difficult, really, really ugly times, we still can always resort to laughter. So thank you all very, very much for everything you've done. Congratulations.
Thank you all, and please join us in thanking Secretary Kantor and Chairman Dreier. Have a good afternoon.